acknowledge first Justin Reed, who is the organizer of these meetups, and the fact that he's able to pull together every month on average 6 different meetings is quite an accomplishment. I certainly appreciate it. And also Colin Dean and our other colleagues from Optic for hosting the meeting. It's much appreciated. My name is Ed Joyce. The title of this evening's talk is 10 Things Tech Writers Want Developers to Know. And the presentation will be given in a question-answer interactive format, kind of informal. So if you have questions and comments as we go along, please chime in, and then there'll certainly be a Q&A period at the end of the meeting. So this presentation was based on an article I wrote for Dr. Dobbs. It was published a couple months ago, and it addressed some of these things which I had noticed as a development manager, some areas of, I guess you could call it miscommunication, some areas between developers and tech writers, some areas that led to decreased productivity. So to get started, how many in the room write documentation of one form or another sometimes? Okay. And how many read documentation sometimes? How many are doc writers? Okay, good, we have 2. Some of my best friends are doc writers, so are 3, so don't be bashful. And just to be sure, does anybody not know what documentation is? Okay. All right. Well, we'll give you an individual tutorial at the end. Okay. But anyway, I think we all prefer that if we could take software, turn it on, and not have to refer to a manual, not have to refer to external reference material. But it doesn't always happen. Despite the best efforts of software designers and engineers, we often need documentation to go along with our products. And let's think of some of the ways we need documentation. For example, a QA person may need to refer to documentation or some type of written material to know how to test the product. Support engineers, certainly, when a customer's having an issue with the product, they will need reference material to find out, okay, how does the product work? How do I find out this particular aspect that's misbehaving? I can explain, get the customer moving again, workarounds, solutions, things like that. Other developers, a new person, for example, comes into IBM here to work on one of the products. What's one of the first things you're going to do? Is probably give them a manual on, okay, this is how this product works. Read over the manual, start working with the software. That goes hand in hand. Our product managers take the documentation, use that to formulate marketing material. Sales representatives hand over a level of documentation to customers to help sell the products. And of course, corporate managers, and ultimately, end users and customers use the documentation to know how the product is going to work. So, as it's pointed out here in the introduction to this particular article, typically developers are not paid to write documentation. And I'll ask Justin, for example, you are a developer, correct?
Yes.
What do you pay to do?
Develop,
okay, which means develop code.
Yes.
Okay, he gets paid, a developer, to develop code. Okay, if you are working with a documentation writer, maybe answering questions, what does that do for your code writing?
Makes it not happen.
Makes it not happen. Okay, so to paraphrase that, we could say it's lowering your productivity by working with the documentation writer. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but the point of my presentation is if you can make those interactions more efficient and streamline them, so the first time you're working with the doc writer, you get the information across, that gives you more time to spend on your code. The documentation writer goes away faster and happier probably, and product gets out the door more quickly. So to help highlight some of the specific things, we'll start with this cartoon, and I'll give you a minute or two to read it, and then I'll go into details. And it illustrates the problem I saw as a development manager where doc writers and developers were working together. Maybe information was going back and forth, but there were disconnects. And I'm thinking, okay, I see the tech writer's questions, they're pretty clear, pretty obvious. The developer came back with this information, very cryptic, assuming they know this level of knowledge, and it's just going to lead to another round of emails, another round of phone calls. You're not going to get it done the first time. So in an ideal world, you would give the draft to the tech writer would craft it in nice, clean prose, give it back to the developer and other stakeholders for review, and you would be ready for final publication of that document. But what happens is illustrated in this case. You have acronyms, for example, that get in the way. You have things that are not understood. You know, it gets to the, in this case, the pointy-headed manager, and says, this isn't right, and it leads to just another round of miscommunication. And you can see the process is going to be drawn out. And if you had maybe spelled out the acronyms to begin with, you wouldn't get into this situation. Take an acronym now, let's call it MVC. MVC, I think most of us today maybe know that as the part of ASP.NET programming model view controller, okay, MVC. But a few years ago, when you first heard MVC, did it mean anything different to anybody else, MVC? Did anybody hit is Microsoft Visual C when you first saw it, maybe? You saw it some obscure thing, okay, MVC, is that Microsoft Visual C? Well, that's this new thing, model view controller. So it's just an example. In the computer industry and our business, acronyms come, they're vetted probably by the millisecond, new acronyms in your name. They fill our emails, they fill our inboxes, they fill our heads. It pays to spell them out. Now we have here, there's actually a federal law called the Plain Writing Act. It was signed into law by President Obama in 2010. And it stipulates use plain writing in every cover document that an agency issues or revises. Train employees in plain writing. Establish a process for overseeing the agency's compliance with the Act and other provisions. And the goal of the law is to make communication that the public can understand and use. So it just illustrates the problem that we have not only in the computer industry, but society at large, getting information across, getting it in a clear manner. I don't know if anybody has actually been thrown in jail for violating this law, but I thought I'd put that up here to make sure get everyone's attention. There's an organization called the Center for Plain Language that has taken this to another level, where they have Clearmark Awards, which they celebrate the best in clear communication in plain language. And then they have, on the opposite spectrum, Wondermark Awards that expose gobbledygook. And the Wondermark came from the expression, well, we wonder what they meant when they wrote that. So, you want to, if you are tracked by the Center for Plain Language, you want to be on the Clearmark side, not the Wondermark side. An example of how you can clutter a technical document is under the category what I call OON, overheating the optic nerve. Now, you take this paragraph here, this actually came from the introduction of a hardware document, And you see you have a lot of detail there, and again, it's in the introductory chapter. And if you consider, if you're eliminating some of that detail that really doesn't need to be there, you've cut out some obvious phrases like the shipping contents of, okay, do you really need to say the shipping contents? You need to waste that space on the paper, and it's kind of obvious you're getting a product, you're getting a package. Likewise, touchscreen LCD monitor station. All right, touchscreen, those two words will do. A 433 megahertz wireless temperature sensor. Okay, does anybody care really in the introduction if it's running at 433 megahertz? 110 volts of AC power. Just say power. And finally, the software package on a 4.7 gigabyte DVD disk. Okay. As long as the software fits on the disk, I think that's our main concern. Don't need to know the total capacity. So, if you shrink that down, you take out that clutter. The original was 36 words, 218 characters, including spaces. With the revision, a clean revision, you get down to 19 words, 138 characters. So you effectively cut the size in half of the text, and yet you've increased the clarity and comprehension significantly. Now, that's not to say that these technical details should be left out. There is a place for them. It's called the appendix. It's in the back of the book. You can put those things in there. You can put them in the index so people can find them if they need to do that. Sometimes when you see words like this, weird descriptions, lengthy adjectives, and I found that the documents maybe originally weren't written in English. They were written in some other language, and then they were translated to English, and it turned out to be a rough translation. So that's something I've observed. The next item, to tightening up documentation, is what I call purge politeness. Okay, it's one thing to be polite on the elevator, but when you're giving somebody technical documentation, you don't have to say please and thank you in giving instructions as you're giving advice. Will that change the user's behavior? I don't think so. For example, if you get this message and you're giving these instructions, if you observe the 22DA error 7 times in a minute, please call our corporate technical support hotline for advice. Thank you. Okay. If I have to call the technical support hotline, you're not going to have to beg me with the word please. And I'm probably going to be very irritated at that point, and I'm not going to be appeased by the word thank you either. So you could just come up with a straight statement, leave out the politeness, leave out the fluff, and the less verbiage I will have to read in that situation, I think that will ease my anxiety overall. Now, when we get into an area of review, you, the developer, have given your text revisions to the tech writer. The tech writer comes back and says, okay, this is what I propose for publication. Okay, it's the developer's responsibility at this point almost to become an editor. You're willing to have the editor. You have to look over that material and make sure that, okay, it describes the product, and it incorporates any changes that you may have suggested. So what constitutes an effective review? There are actually three main elements. Number one is accuracy. Is the documentation describing the product accurately? If it is not, then okay, you have a major problem, and that has to be the primary objective. So it's somewhat self-explanatory, accuracy. Number two, thoroughness. And by thoroughness, I mean, obviously, if you were adding to the documentation maybe a description of a new dialogue, okay, you would want to make sure that's described accurately, perhaps any contingencies, dependencies, those kinds of things, and the documentation writer took all that into consideration. However, You also want to maybe look at the document for overall to see if there are outdated references. For example, if you come up with a statement in the document that says, this product is not compatible with Windows 95, or this product requires a minimum of 2 gigabytes of RAM. As a user, if I see that, I'm going to say, this documentation is 10 or 15 years old. It was written a couple days after the abacus was invented. And that leaves you with a question, okay, what else in the documentation is inaccurate or leaves you wanting, to know, okay, what other shortcomings are there? So take that opportunity to go through those things that may have the cobwebs in them and clean those up too. And the third thing is timeliness. If you are giving the document feedback, you want to give him or her time to incorporate that into the main documentation in a reasonable amount of time and not give it to them with only a couple hours to go for the release deadline. It's unfair and you can't expect them to do a good job under that kind of time pressure, and you wouldn't want it yourself. Also, take the effort to meet them face to face. The information density generally when you're sitting across the table from somebody is much higher and goes much smoother and quicker than if you try to say something in an email, if you try to leave an instant message, voice message, or even a phone call. Obviously, if it's a lengthy amount of material, it may make more sense to put it in an email. But if you're discussing something, especially if it's this kind of nebulous concept and you've gone around the block a couple times, do it face to face. And when you're looking over the document, what constitutes reasonable edits? And we'll take a survey here, and we have 2 ways of expressing this simple instruction. The first one is use the dialog under Edit Preferences Cursors to change the cursor format. Another way of saying it is navigate to the dialog under Edit Preferences Cursors to change the cursor format. Who prefers number 1? Okay, I see 6 hands. Who prefers number 2? Okay, we have 4 hands, maybe 5, and probably 1 or 2 people abstain, which is okay. Well, the answer is neither is correct. They both kind of deliver the same message. There's some cosmetic differences, but they're both accurate. So the rule of thumb here is if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. And avoid the temptation to micro-edit. If the doc writer wrote it one way, okay, it expresses the idea, gets the concept across, leave it be. Save your rating for more important changes. The doc writer may have written it one way because the company has a policy of, or maybe precedent of always expressing, navigate to the dialogue. This product, that product. You as a developer may not know that because you're only working on the ABC product. Or you may say, well, this is how we used to do it in my old company. Well, who cares how you did it in your old company? This company has a whole product suite with dozens of manuals, and they all use this type of format. So, allow the doc writer to use their discretion in these cases. The next item is revere visuals. We all know, or perhaps all heard, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So, if you were to look at, for example, a YouTube video on how to do a subscript in Microsoft Word, I have it up here. But unfortunately, this, I don't have speakers plugged into this laptop. But the idea is the speaker showing how you can do superscripting and subscripting in Microsoft Word, and this is a 90-second video. Okay, so you could give someone this link if, for example, this is a new feature in the product and someone had a document, Or you could say, going back to the presentation, select the home font menu command, click superscript, click OK. Okay. You know, you may get the message across, you may not. And it's not only videos, but screenshots, you know, other things you can do, camera phones, you can show images, share that with the doc writer. You know, that can also always frequently get to the heart of a technical matter, and they can develop more and clear, concise description of material. Okay, the next item is be monolingual. And you may think, okay, monolingual, well, what does it mean? Because we're just talking about, largely talking about documentation in English, and you know, that's certainly true. And when we just writing in one language, right? We're just writing in, for an English-speaking audience. And at this point, I call this my, there are actually two languages in there, in this little snippet of technical material. There's English, and the other language is Latin. So we'll go through this to see, you know, how many people know these items in red are Latin abbreviations and phrases. Okay, so we have the wireless communication between the base station and the remote module, i.e. the client sensor. Does everybody know what IE means in this context? It means?
That is.
That is. Okay. Any others?
Example.
Available?
Example.
Oh, example. Okay. Or namely? Anybody think Internet Explorer? Okay. All right, so I think we got that one pegged. Reaches distances of 100 meters in unimpeded areas, e.g. direct line of sight. E.g.
Specifically.
Specifically? Okay.
So to say. Example.
For example? Okay, good. I think we got that one. And the next phrase, ergo, place the base and client in fields, beaches, urban lots. Okay, who's the Latin scholar that knows ergo? Therefore, okay, good. And finally, urban lots et al. And others. Okay, good. So, it didn't sound like a little bit like a legal document, but in any case, if you know Latin, if you spent 4 years in high school or college studying Latin, that's good. But you need try to be sophisticated and worldly by peppering technical documents with Latin. The issue becomes one of not only your English-speaking audience may not all those Latin words, but think what happens when it comes to translating it to another language. If the product is successful, you want to take it to other markets overseas. The poor translators are going to be looking at those things. What do I do with this? So, save the Latin for church, save it for toga parties, don't put it in the documentation. And I mentioned translation. In this day and age, if a product is successful, expect it to be translated, right? Most products have resource files. As we developers, we build product and we build code. The resource files have the text and the customer-facing information, so that stuff can be translated separately without touching the binary code in many cases. And you may think at this point, okay, my job is done as a developer and a tech writer. You know, we put the published product out there, the product is selling, the documentation is going out with it, no complaints, users are happy. But then there is this next milestone. Is it going to be translated, and how can it be translated? And what can we be doing at the time we write the documentation originally so it is well staged for translation? And there are a couple items I'd like to touch upon here. First one I call same term for same concept. So, we look at this sentence: to activate the software product, ensure that you are logged in with the administrator privileges on the system. Download the kit to your computer, run the installation utility to activate the program on your hardware. Okay, if you're in an English-speaking environment, these three sentences are pretty simple, they're straightforward, you will probably understand them. Or if somebody gave you these instructions over the phone, no problem, I know what's going on. But consider the fact that you're a translator and you're in Hyderabad. English is the second language to you. You're looking at this and you see, okay, effectively 3 different terms for the word software. There's something called the software product, okay. There's something called the kit. Okay, what kind of kit could that be? Download the kit, is it a zip file, is it an ISO? These kinds of questions are going through their mind. Activate the program. Okay, activate the program. Is that one particular special program? Is it the installation program? Is it this? Or is it, these things could be going through their mind. Similarly, we have descriptions of the hardware. We're using the word system, computer, and hardware. When we could just use one word, computer. And the system, is it the network they're on? Is it more than just one single computer? Hardware, okay, activate the program on your hardware. Is it a phone? Is it a laptop? Is it a tablet? All these things could be going through their mind. But you can see how you could eliminate all that by just using one single term for this when you're referring to the same context. In this case, you use software for those 3 terms and computer for those 3. It eliminates a lot of confusion. It makes the translator's job a lot easier. Another area to consider is our culture-specific expressions. Okay, so if you read this, the attribute not found there may be a red herring. To level the playing field, run the database verification utility. Okay, people who grew up in an English-speaking country probably know what that means. They probably heard those expressions. They know what's going on. Okay, we can do this. However, think about it. This text is shipped with your product to Beijing, and some guy or gal, Chinese, English is the second language for them. They're faced with translating this. So they come across, okay, it could be a red herring. What's a red herring? Look up in the dictionary. Oh, some kind of fish. Maybe there's a fish problem here. And they read along a little bit more, level the playing field. Oh, okay, that's like the pitch on a soccer field. So you can let your imagination run a little bit to think of what the translated result of that's going to be. So if you eliminate culture-specific expressions that could have dual meanings or they are very common lingo, jargon, that kind of thing, and just technicalities like here, the attribute not found there may be related to another problem. Check the database by running the table verification utility. It makes the job a little bit easier, and your translation in the end will be much clearer to its intended audience. So that covers just about everything. The article URL is out on the web. It's right here. You can follow that long URL, or you can search drdobbs.com for my name, Ed Joyce, and you'll find that article. Ultimately, the purpose of this is not to make developers seasoned, perfect documentation writers, but it's certainly to increase their productivity by having them spend less time answering questions. So if they would answer the questions right the first time, or be mindful of these things when they're answering questions, it'll streamline the process. It will also make doc writers more productive because they won't be coming back to the developers as frequently. They'll have a better understanding what is meant, what they need to do to get the product, to get the description accurate. It will help mitigate deforestation, save a tree or two from getting sent to the paper mill. But most importantly, our users and customers will have clear, concise documentation to work with. And no matter how hard we try to build great software is not going to need any documentation. Let's face it, there's a lot of software out there that's just going to be shelfware if it doesn't have at least a good starting set of documentation, even if it's just a couple pages. Finally, our most important slide of the night is I'm available for hire. I'm in between jobs, so software engineering manager, Azure Java developer, certified Agile Scrum Master, open to other things, and I will pay a finder's fee for anybody that gets the right opportunity. So at this point, I'd like to open up the presentation to your questions, comments, anything you've observed, either on the development side of the fence, the back side of the fence, some things that you could add to this list.
I have a question. What, in your experience, what is the most common class of questions that a doc writer would come back to a developer with? Like, you gave me this description. Like, what do they have trouble with?
Common class of questions from doc writers. Well, first, I have seen situations where doc writers will take verbatim what a developer gives them, and they may not understand it, but they may be under a time crunch. It gets pasted in the end documentation. And you say, did anybody read that with the idea of trying to understand that? And doc writers, well, I figured that the developer knew what he or she was talking about, and I pasted that in. So that's one thing to be wary of. Other common things are maybe left out steps. Maybe the developer gave some abbreviated steps on how to get from point A to point B. The doc writer maybe made sense or didn't follow them specifically with from the mindset of the user. Say, okay, so it gets in the user's hands, and the users are calling text the board and saying, well, I don't understand step 3, or how do you get from step 3 to step 4? There are these intermediate steps are missing. So that's another area that you need to be wary of and be mindful of. Other questions? Comments? Yes.
So your mention about be monolingual, thank you. I had a former manager who would complain that every time she had to read one of my documents, she had to go and look up what IE meant. Apparently I use it a lot. And at the time I thought, man, she's just not that bright. And then I realized, you know what, if she doesn't understand what it means, thank you, that when I pass it over an email to someone in India or China who's going to turn my documentation into software, they're not going to understand it either. So,
right.
So thank you for pointing that one out.
And it's a global world out there. We're dealing with contractors offshore. We're dealing with colleagues and employees offshore, and there's the time zone difference, there's the culture difference. Let's at least try to mitigate the language difference, stick to core parts of the English language. Jeff?
So I've been typically on smaller teams in my career, so it's largely developers writing documentation for other developers. Is there any, where there's no technical writer involved and the only person that's going to read your documentation is another developer, basically, is there any specific tactics just for that situation you recommend, or do most of the same rules apply? I don't know.
So if you're writing documentation, it's mainly for the benefit of other developers on the team, are there specific rules or guidelines, As with any writing, I think the first thing is review. Have someone else review it, because it's so easy to be deep in the forest that you can't see the trees. And you know, after you write something and maybe you live with the product and you've navigated it, and you've designed the dialogues, you've designed the architecture behind it, you know, or maybe areas that doesn't need an explanation, or you just gloss over it with a one-sentence explanation, and you hand that set of written material to maybe to the new person on the team and just say, hey, yeah, does this documentation register? Can you get through this and you know understand the product by reading it? They can often find fallacies or shortcomings. You know, just having a fresh set of eyes looking at it, and that's of course why you know, even best-selling authors have editors and have publishing houses and copywriters review their material, because it's human nature. People miss those kinds of things. Yes?
Yes, I'm one of the technical writers in the room, so I wanted to first of all say thanks for writing the article, because it's nice to see that developers are, you know, thinking about this and looking at ways to improve the process. I'll just let you know it as a person who's been in the software industry my entire career. Technical writers actually do a lot of, we have a lot of talks and papers written about how to work more efficiently with subject matter experts. So we're always striving to work very efficiently and take a lot of the burden off of developers when we're working on documentation. So, I mean, I thought it was interesting, like a lot of the things you were talking about, like how do you word this path and using Latin phrases and using idioms. That's stuff that I normally have never gotten that level of documentation. Normally I'm writing it. So I know everyone has different experiences, but quite often I'm writing that part of the documentation and the software based on specs, based on, you know, blog posts, whatever way that people, that software development has spec'd out their what the end result's going to be. So we use a lot of different materials to try to put together the documentation. So when it goes to developers for review, a lot of times, yes, we're just looking that it's accurate, that we haven't missed anything, that we haven't miscommunicated any of the concepts. So in any case, I'm glad we're looking at it from both sides.
What company or organization with?
I work for IBM.
Okay, you're here.
Yes, I didn't come too far for this meeting.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts or comments on maybe differences with open source projects compared to the context of maybe whatever company or?
Well, I'll say with my own experience with open source is there's been a lot of wonder marks. In other words, what do they mean by that? You know, trying to figure it out, and maybe the people doing the open source are thinking, well, the source code's there. You know, if you really want to know what's going on, the source code's there. Yeah, I mean, you can go dig through the source code, but it would be nice to have a good description. Now, I'm not saying, you know, the high-profile products like Mozilla and other open source projects have those problems, but when you get into the lesser-known things, you know, you see inaccuracies, you see, you know, doc that seems to be a generation or two behind the current release, and you take it with a grain of salt, hope it's accurate, but you know, I'm not surprised if I see things misbehaving or not behaving according to what they're spec.
Well, then kind of like I find myself in the opposite position of like trying to provide open source small open source libraries. What should I be focusing on? And I guess you kind of answered right there. The things you just described as frustrations are the things that I should be focusing on to provide as documentation with smaller libraries that, you know, myself or maybe a couple of other colleagues are working on.
Right, yeah, I've spent time recently going through Android APIs for projects I'm working on, and you know, I see some things there that just, you know, it looked like they didn't benefit from any decent editing. They they're in there, maybe trying 2 different APIs, and they're definitely different APIs, but the descriptions are almost identical. And you're thinking to myself, okay, which one do I use? What's the difference? What's the benefit of one versus the other? And so things like that. You kind of like, a lot of it is going back to, okay, what did I see? Well, maybe early in my career that baffled me, and avoid those pitfalls. Try to, give minimal information. Try to give return codes. Try to show what default values would be. It's how many APIs out there they'll tell you what the default behavior is. If you don't do something, why can't they put that in? Or they don't explain all the return codes, things like that. That's rudimentary documentation for that level of software, in my opinion. Any questions, right? Gentleman on the end there.
I just had a question. You talked about being thorough, but you also talked about having reasonable edits. It seems like kind of a thin line for someone who's like a perfectionist. So how do you kind of find that balance between your feedback?
Between being thorough
And also like giving reasonable edits, like criticism.
well, do people know what it's like to be micromanaged? Have you ever had a boss or maybe a significant other or a sibling, whatever, a friend, micromanaged? And, in my opinion, it's called micro-editing. Okay, you got a comma here. I think that should be a semicolon, or break this 12-word sentence into 2 sentences. So you want to deliver good feedback, but you don't want to painstakingly take something apart to the point where somebody's going to dread getting another review from you. So, but thorough also does mean looking at areas of the documentation that maybe have been ignored. A lot of times the doc writers assume that that they'll say to people, please review this, from beginning chapter 1, chapter to the end. And if you see anything, let me know. But a lot of people on the development side are only going to focus on areas they know they changed for that particular release. So you start seeing things in the documentation like, okay, if you get a Java exception when you press this menu button, do this workaround, and that stays in the document for maybe years. And somebody finally looks at it and says, well, that got fixed umpteen releases ago. We can pull that out. And it's those kinds of things people have to be cognizant of and aware of to try to clean out that old clutter. And of course, any references to obsolete operating systems, it's time to bring your documentation into modern era, or at least out of the 1990s. Any other comments, suggestions?
So on kind of a furthering to that point, how do you go on rescue missions for bad documentation?
Rescue mission for bad documentation. Well, your customers may tell you that may be your first negative feedback, and you may want to bring someone in who's a professional, makes it their. I think with small companies start out, you got a couple developers, then maybe you get your marketing, your salesperson, then maybe you get your QA person, and then you start to hit critical mass and you realize, all right, we need someone who can put this down in writing in a clear fashion, and so it's just not understood between developers who are sharing cubicle walls. It's something that's going to look professional in front of customers. Some our salespeople could take the presentations and leave. So you know, that's one way to rescue bad documentation, bring in a professional writer, or even on a contract basis. Most of my background is in development, and I look at documentation and have to work with documentation writers, and that's why I realized that there are these disconnects. If people would be more focused and more streamlined on the process and the channel of information flowing back and forth, everyone I think would be happier, and we would be at our end goal much quicker.
Anything else?
Okay, well, I thank you for your feedback and your attention, and that concludes the presentation.